thank you for coming here today. So my name is Ratna, and I'm at the School of Business, and this is my first public lecture, joining as a full-time staff here after many years of being a sessional. So I've got my PhD in October of 2024, and moving forward. So I have an agenda today that I would like to share with you. And so International Women's Day, these are the few things that I'm covering. And so what does the theme for the International Women's Day is about for 2025? It's accelerate action. And that simply means that we want to rally the support of women all over the world, all right, to basically support all sorts of creative initiatives to support women in their advancement and beyond. So it could be small scale, large scale, but basically, you want to support women. And so let's move on with that as well. So, gender equality. What do we understand by that? So, gender equality is across the world. It varies. And this comes from the World Economic Forum. And the statistics is actually showing the top 10 countries that has actually narrowed the gender gap. And we can see here Iceland continues to top consistently, narrowing the gap by 90%. So these are the list of 10 countries. Iceland followed by Norway, Finland, New Zealand. So when we talk about gender, what do we mean by that? The gender, the so-called gender equality is basically underpinned by the gender parity. And gender parity is just the idea that women and men have equal representation opportunities. So let's look at where does Singapore stand. So these are the bottom 10 countries where we narrow the gap by 74%. Next, we move on to the Gender Gap Index from the World Economic Forum as well. This is latest. And it measures the gender gap in terms of these 4 sub-areas: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Now, this report says that most economies are actually trying very best, pressing forward in all of these 4 areas. But however, right, even if they do these gaps, trying to reduce these gaps in all these 4 areas with government support and also with the community, there is a problem. The scale and the stability of interventions in each of these happens to remain very insufficient, probably because of the current business transformations that are happening. And so what is the outcome of all of this? Is that we have to understand is that these areas, right, when we narrow these gaps in all of these 4 areas, this will give us the impression that there's an economic imperative need to make sure the gap is reduced. So women would have unfettered access to all sorts of resources and also opportunities and decision making in lead roles. Taken together, what does this mean? It simply means that companies have to have a change in mindset in terms of bringing initiatives to advance women's empowerment in the workplace. And so, how does this translate into economic? So we have here also from the McKinsey Global Institute in 2018 that gives you some information. Now, when women enter the workforce, the economies grow. And women's economic empowerment increases their diversification, increases prosperity and also equality for shared prosperity. Now in Asia, as you look here, Asia Pacific, advancing women's the equality, it actually increases the annual GDP by 2025. This is from 2018. So 4.5 trillion is what is added on, or in other words, 2% GDP. So which means we tend to narrow these gaps. This is what it adds on. So this is pretty impressive, and at the same time, we can see that the UN study tells you about closing the gender gap would give you $7 trillion. And more on top of that, if companies had 3 or more women in senior positions, companies' performance in all sorts of dimensions would actually improve as well. So these are the studies that actually kind of tell us a bit more about empowerment. Now, moving forward from this, we have the McKinsey and Company Leaning Organization, a non-profit organization that did a study on the state of women in corporate America. So here tells you over the span of so-called 10 years, a decade, where this survey on employee experience survey done by women, 15,000 employees in 27 organizations, they did an employee experience survey. And across many things and many themes were covered. Job satisfaction, their workplace, hybrid, or it's based on remote, the employee well-being, and so on and so forth. And what they uncovered from this study was that over the past 10 years, women's representation across all of these levels, entry level, manager level, director, all the way to the C-suite, the women's representation has increased at every level. But if you notice the C-suite, 29% women make up of it, compared to 70%. So there's a slight increase in that sense, but progress has been much slower in the pipeline, which is the entry level and the manager level. Hasn't been moving much. So which means we have to think about what are companies doing right. If companies set up the right kind of priorities and communicate that along to the managers, everybody would be doing better. They would be less burnt out, they would be happy in their jobs, and they also would think less likely of leaving the companies. But is that the same priorities for women? So when you look at the green bar here, this is taken also from McKinsey's Global Institute, 2018. Managers do say, or the companies do say, that they're providing the communication and giving training to their employees. So this bar here on the green bar basically tells you that 90%, all right, managers are saying, yeah, we are providing and communicating and giving training to the employees. But women, in contrast, are saying, no, it's about 45. It's half of that. Similarly, when it comes to employee well-being, you can see that managers are saying about 80%, but women are saying about 65% they're reporting. And for equity and inclusion as well, you can see it is very different from what companies are saying and what women are saying. So that's the two bars related to that. Let's look at also in terms of what happened between 2017 and 2024, where you could see here the blue bar represents the form of career advancements over the 2017 to 2024. And here the programs, whether they are tailored towards women's advancements, it clearly shows you that 37% is much lower in 2024, 37% actually into mentorship as compared to 2017. Sponsorship is about 11%. Career development is still static at 54%. Internship is also very low. And recruitment programs as well. So these kind of tell you more and more companies are scaling down on employees, on women programs for career advancements. So this is corporate America that we're talking about. And what about Asia? So this is from LinkedIn, and it's talking about the underrepresentation in leadership. So you can see in Australia, the workforce, 49% is actually comprising of women. From 2020, it was about 35, went up to 38, and then now it's at 41%. In India, it's dropped. Singapore, 35 to 38% increase. This is about the leadership and women. We see there's much more to be done here. And lack of progress is what we are talking about in terms of the female representation. So what do we do about this? The next question I was thinking when I saw this is, what about the kind of industries that women can enter into? So this one comes from the World Economic Forum over 2016-2024. It talks about the different industries, the entry level, And if you notice at the top, we can see that hospitals and healthcare is easy entry for women to get into, followed by consumer services, education, and government administration. So it's easy for women to enter into these, but then there's the question of what about their share or the average share into being into leadership? What does that show? So there is a table that I have, I'll show you here. It tells you about the C-suite and the entry level for the first 5 that I've picked up. So if you look at the entry level for healthcare at the bottom, it's easy to get in, 67% women. And moving up, you can see consumer services is about 58%, the entry level, easy to get in. But when it comes to climbing up that ladder to the C-suite, it drops. Significant drop is in the consumer services and in education, government and public, retail and healthcare. So that's why we call it the drop to the top, meaning to say that it's not easy for women to climb in these industries. It gets worse, much worse, when it comes to the bottom. As you can see, the industries in, let's say, retail, wholesale, oil and gas, all those different industries at the bottom. So this is concerning. So I'm hoping we are understanding where we are going with this dialogue. So what do women say who are career leaders? Women, female leaders, they advocate. This is based on the LinkedIn hiring of managers across APAC. They've mentioned that 54% of women leaders are talking about career advancements. They want internal mobility, and 50% are talking about flexible work arrangements and policies to suit that for women to progress. So in terms of leadership, I've identified 3 scholarships that actually help women. One is in Melbourne, the Melbourne School, which actually works with non-profit organization, Victoria Charitable Organization, and they provide the CEW and the HMSD scholarship for women. From corporate, from public surveys, from government and academic and even non-profit organizations. Women who want to advance, they have this scholarship. Singapore, we have from NTU University, we have the Tan Siu Chia Powers. Power Scholarship supports women, especially encouraging them to go into STEM, which is your science, technology, engineering, and maths. So this is from the university level all the way up, a career in STEM that's promoted. In fact, the International our IWD is actually talking about this as well, encouraging more women into STEM careers. And then we have the SMU Diana Co International Scholarship. This one also encourages non-Singaporeans in the Asian region. They provide them with financial need as well for those kind of scholarship. So it's good to hear that we have such help needed initiatives that kind of shifts the needle, in terms of career advancements. Somewhere in Asia we are doing these things as well as in Australia. So this is a pretty good. We talk so much about education and we talk about advancements, but there's also another important thing, and that happens to be trying to reduce the gender equity over the past century, right? What about the gender gap, the health gap? We need to think about that because health is, of course, correlated to economic productivity. It's linked to that. And the UN actually said that women do live longer than men, average of 4.5 years longer. And in Singapore, the life expectancy of women happens to be 86.3 years based on the UN 2021 data. So you look at the World Economic Forum, this report and the McKinsey Health Institute, they are saying that women actually now spend another 25% of their life in debilitating health. That means health worsening. So that's what we call the morbidity, not so much of where men is more about mortality. So this is general health conditions that affect the women differently. Higher disease burden, disproportionately higher prevalence. So knowing that, when I look at Singapore's case is only we don't spend 25%, we spend 12% in debilitating health. So if you look at the maths here, 12% of the 86, that comes up to about 10 years, which means women start to have debilitating health from the age of 75, 76, in that sense. Secret of healthy aging is not so much about what you do when you're old, but when you are young. And so a lot of nutritionalists tell the young adults, ladies, women, that you have to build up your health reserves. It's the most important time. But of course, sometimes all of this would be affected by their diets and things like that. So that's something we have to think about. So if the woman's health gap is worsened, it just implies that she would not be able to present herself productive at home, productive at work, or her community, and reduces her potential, her earning potential. So you can see here the age from 20 to 70 happens to be their working years, where if they can narrow the health gap, they actually contribute 80% of the GDP. That works up to 800 billion of the 1.025 trillion. So this is a very interesting, talking about health on top of the equality and the gender parity and things like that. So, since we have this information, talking about health so much, I'm kind of curious about women in terms of how we are made up genetically. Right? Females, we are considered slightly different from men, right? In terms of our neurological build-up, we have a thicker prefrontal cortex, as you can see. That means our decision making, that helps with the decision making and also with working with all our emotional regulation and control. So pretty much higher, better than men in that sense. We also have the amygdala, which is the processing of our emotions and also about whatever happens around us, not just our emotions, but also others. The insula, which you can see also, it also talks about the emotional, the empathy, and it's basically what we call our epicenter of our emotions, how we manage and emotional intelligence, in other words. So women pretty much excel greatly in the empathy, the resilience, and the adaptability when it comes to high stress. Managing all the emotions around us, reading the emotions, working with teams. Altogether, that basically means that we have a greater ability to stress, response to stress, whereas for men would be what? Fight or flight, which is the common notion. So these things kind of give us the idea that, we are able to handle stress. So now I would like you all to actually take your phone, have a look at this image. It talks about emotional intelligence. Let's see the male and the females. How do we fare in these things? So I'm going to show you the QR code. Pink for the women, blue for the male. And let's see how do you fare in terms of the judgment of emotional intelligence. So I'm just looking at the results. Everybody done, I hope? Okay, so I'm looking at the QR code for men, and 25% got it right. It's embarrassment. Embarrassment is the right answer. And 25% of the men who got it right, most of them got it. Most of the men use amusement. That's not right. And the women, I'm going back to the women. %64 for embarrassment. Yay! So the answer is actually embarrassment. Okay, good.
How do we know the person is embarrassed? It's not a nice...
Yeah, so the best thing is this emotional intelligence, you can find it online. There's a whole host of images there. Even I got it wrong a couple of times. So it's very interesting. They give you the answers as well, why that particular feature is embarrassing. You can read on that and then you can understand how anger looks like, embarrassment, shame, and all sorts of things. It's very interesting to know that. I found it particularly hilarious doing it actually. All right. Thank you for trying that. Now go into my research. And my research is on a particular strategic volunteering, corporate volunteering, which we call skills-based volunteering. So the CV that you see here is corporate volunteering, but particularly targeting on how corporate employees actually are involved in company-initiated volunteering programs where they apply their skills and try and help out the non-profit organizations with any of their causes. And so I was particularly interested in how do all these volunteering activities that employees are involved in, how does it actually bring back to the workplace? How does it affect the workplace? So I use the word engagement here. And so I have things like constructs, basically motivations, which can be your own to help others, which is others' motivation. You could be motivated to do corporate volunteering because, you want to help others. More altruistic. The second reason could be self-motivations, personal motivations. Maybe you want to get networks. You want to meet people. You want to improve your skills. Those kind of personal motivations are there. So you go in with these motivations, you find your meaningfulness from that, and then that could actually trigger your participation, increase participation, and whether or not it also increases your engagement. And then I also have the support. It's another construct. You must have support from the company, all right, that gives you a kind of safety that, yes, you can continue participating in such company initiatives. And there's also an individual trait, a high personality trait here that's called core self-evaluation. So this trait is basically about people who believe that, they are able to cope with any kind of demands, any kind of problems. They are, determined to what they can do with their lives. So it's a very high, strong personality trait, core self-evaluation. So together, I wanted to find out about how does it impact us back to the workplace. So this is the quantitative study that I did, and you can see women participated more, 59%. Men is about 41%. You can see the age group as well. Millennials mostly who took part in it. And in terms of their participation in the decision making of these kind of skills-based volunteering is when they find it relevant. So you can see 52% do it when it's relevant to them. And of course, the skills that they practice, you can see teamwork, communication, time management, leadership, mentorship. Now, most people would say these are very much what we call interpersonal skills or soft skills. Much less is to IT and things like that, which are the hard skills. And most of them were also happy in their job as well. So, I also did the hypothesis testing. All right, so this is a statistical tool that we use. And if you notice here, men actually, I highlighted in terms of gender, you can see that both are male and female for participation, male and female for engagement at work. At the top that you see the models 3 and 4 is for participation in the volunteering. Models 5 and 6 is more about the engagement back at work. Men, male volunteers, they felt the meaningfulness of the job of the volunteering project is actually the one that's most important for them to participate. But for women happens to be their psychological availability, meaning to say whether or not they have those kind of competing demands, they can able to confident to handle things, and that kind of determine whether they participated in the volunteering activities. So that was interesting to know about that. So of the analysis in terms of their model 5 and 6 talks about their engagement back at work. For women, it's helping others, right? That significantly affected their engagement back at work, which means to say that by helping others, they probably have a great deal of emotions. We talked about female emotions, the emotions of empathy. They're doing something, they've impacted these non-profit organizations, doing good for them. They see that their skills have been actually done some changes to, to the non-profit cause or to the beneficiaries. And so that kind of gave them the positive emotions. We didn't see that in the men. So women were more likely to experience such emotions, You can call it helpers high as well, that, but motivates them and bringing back all that positive energy back to the workforce or the workplace itself. So they're highly engaged. And highly engaged employees are basically highly committed, highly productive, and also contribute positive to their companies as well. And bringing about the organization's success as well. So this is what my study kind of proved. And I also did a qualitative study with focus groups. We have even number men and women there, 8 men and 8 women. We have managers, we have employees as well. So here you can actually see some of the narratives to show about the positive emotions that they bring back, to the workplace. So one of the narratives here is because you get to see the impact of what you're doing in a very positive way, and you know that someone is going to benefit from that. And even though it may not always be tangible, so I find it very fulfilling to contribute my skills in a meaningful way. For employees, volunteers, they were saying the CSR team helps to put together people to volunteer. Employees, they bond with one another, giving them the opportunity, to put their hand up together. So basically teamwork that they are enjoying and bringing that back to the workplace. Positive emotions. And some of them even go on to leadership roles. So so when they are in the volunteering role, they're taking leadership roles that contributes special kind of skills and expertise, and that bringing back to the organization as well. So these are all what we say the women, all right, probably, earning all these soft skills and better managing their stress levels as well, combating, the demands of job as well. They seem to be able to handle it better. The emotional intelligence is also there. We can see that. So this is how my qualitative study actually had proved. So we're kind of coming to the end of this whole thing. And what we've covered so far, we've touched on the gender parity. We talked deeper into the lesser representation of women at the C-suites. We also talked about the scaling back of all of these programs, corporate programs for women's advancements. And we find it even harder to climb up the C-suite for some industries, which is what we have learned so far. We also heard about some of the hiring managers. The leaders say we need more internal mobility, we need career developments, we need to have flexible work arrangements to close this women's gap as well, the gender gap. And we also talked about closing the health gap as well, where 1.1 trillion is added on by closing the gap. So all of this is pretty resounding, and we manage our health better. This is all going to be improved in our competing demands. And from my research also that, women can handle better in terms of competing demands. They've shown how they can bring back the positive energies, the emotions back to the workplace. And these kind of spillovers into the workplace as well. So I kind of rounded up this whole, going through all the data, the secondary data, including of mine, and how we work in JCU as well, different opportunities, putting up ourselves to try new things, developing our talents. So I think there are 3 tips that I would like to share. First of all, women, we have to actually think outside of the box. And when I say we are thinking outside of the box, it simply means that you have to find what really fits you. That means you challenge yourselves, all right? And in that sense, I say acquire new skills, find out new talents. Maybe you have a hidden talent that you want to develop further. Find the opportunities to develop those. And on top of that, embrace all the alternatives that you have. Because what works best for you is what you know. But at the same time, don't go overboard, because you also need to set some boundaries to know there's a work and life balance. So I think these 3 tips in JCU as well, we kind of work together and we We manage it, and it's been pretty much, I would say, a very good journey. It also helps the empowerment, all right, when we know what we are, in terms of all of these tips that we have here, finding our own pathways, or in other words, cracking your own code. So this is the last quote that I wanted to put up here from one of the managers. So we are a people organization, education. In most of the organizations are also like that. If we don't have our people, we don't have our talent, we don't have the best talent, we cannot grow and provide all those services. So we need to find ways, bringing those talents here and the best talents. So not only for volunteering, but also, bringing it all this back into the organization. Okay, I'm waiting for questions. Or even on the floor here, anybody can ask any questions that you want to. Yes.
Thank you, Ratna. Thank you, Ratna, for the very interesting insights that you presented to us. Just one question towards the end when you did your findings. I'm just curious as to how you arrive at the findings that, women, doesn't mean that women are not thinking out of the box or they're not facing enough challenges. So I'm just wondering, how did you arrive at, the concluding part of your presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Caroline.
Thank you.
So thinking out of the box is more about when women we're supposed to be, we're considered to be able to handle our job scopes, handle our work and life balances. That's actually the initiative that we want to pursue. But of course, it may not be all the time. Women will not be able to do that. The support is not there. If they have, I would say most of the time the support is not there. And sometimes it's also the individual mindset that they can't do something. So when they have a negative emotion coming in there that basically tells them you shouldn't do this or you can't do this, you won't be able to do this, and those negative thoughts will then leave them to not think out of the box. So I think support is definitely there, need to be there in any form. If it's not at home, it could be at the workplace. We have to find out where exactly that support is coming from the women point of view. So that's my take on it, thinking out of the box. You cannot always be depending on someone will do this for you or get this done for you, but basically that you have to reach out. And that takes a little bit of courage, I would believe, and a bit of work on it. So I'm not going into the psychology of it, but I think, that's really about the idea behind thinking out of the box. Hope that answers. I have a question here, I believe. Why does the company earn more of women enter it? Women entering into the workforce, the whole idea behind it is that we don't have, the data kind of shows that women do enter into certain industries easily, but for them to move up the ladder to the higher levels is harder. And what I was trying to express is that different industries, as we have seen, healthcare is easy to enter, but you can't really climb up as much as you think. Half of the talent is stuck. Half of the talent is just stuck at the entry level. They're not moving up. They're not able to move up. And that's what the drop to the top means. So I hope that answers the question. Any more? Yes?
What challenges did the participants face, like in your research, right?
Yeah.
What challenges did the participants face, like when you were trying to figure out the volunteer groups between the men and the women? So, did they share similar challenges, or were there anything distinctively different?
Women definitely do talk about time, and they do talk about the flexibility of the work arrangements. They also talked about their supervisors not supporting them, even though they are doing their job, but they realize that, walking the talk, they're not doing that. Men, on the other hand, I think they more are interested in what am I going to get out of this? So it's very much more or less like, what do I get from doing this? Whereas women don't really think too much about that. They think about the time more and the management of that time to get into the volunteering. So, thank you. What are women's biggest weaknesses? I think in terms of women, I think, work better. I wouldn't say the biggest weaknesses. I would narrow it down to say they work better when they have resources. And I don't talk about companies giving the resources, but employee resource groups. In other words, teams, allyship, we have allies together, we work together. I think that kind of emotionally we built up that strength. So even if we may not have the right support from the companies, I think when we have the emotional support from other women, even from your women leaders, I think that's a big step that you can overcome any kind of weaknesses. I think I wouldn't generalize as the biggest weaknesses in that sense. But I think if you don't get that support from your friends, your co-friends, you can even get support from your male leaders as well, your male friends as well. So that is what I would suggest, because I see that in the qualitative study a lot. They need those kind of... So it's a mindset that has to shift. I believe that the mindset shift, women can actually progress better that way. How women can take care of their mental well-being at workplace. I think I kind of answered that a little bit from the question that I just answered. On top of that, besides just talking about whether or not you get the proper resources and emotional support from around your network, I think once we do get that, it's important for us to keep that momentum going. We also need to advance from there. Like I said, think out of the box, accept challenges, find alternatives. All this basically means that you have to take that leap of faith to do certain things. A lot of us would just say, no, I'm not going to try that. I don't want to try that. But by not trying, you never know what you're going to experience. And that experience would maybe change your life, for that matter, and giving you maybe the extra confidence that you lacked. So I hope that answers. Yes, Dr.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm very nervous asking this question as a man on an International Women's Day special. Your presentation was superb in the way you had presented the women's challenges and the things that they encounter at the workplace. Unequal as it is, as we assume, can you share with us, if you had learned anything about how the women relate to men and how the men relate to the women in the context of their inequalities and equalities? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's important for women to actually stop thinking themselves as inferior in terms of what they can't do. So once we set ourselves as being we can't do certain things, so let's say your manager comes to you, a male comes to you and asks you certain things to do, it's not a good thing for us to start by saying we can't do this. We have to first of all think about what do we have, the support and the resources we have to do this job or do this task. And then work with our leaders and with our support group, basically how we can achieve them. So in terms of men or females, I don't think there is any disparity. I would believe that men, and women have the same agenda. Similarly, men also could be weak in certain things. And so it's a matter of a women leader can work with men, and a women leader, and how does a man who is weaker in certain confidence, how does that work together? So we have to think about all of this together. So I wouldn't really say women are weaker in anything. I would say we have that extra strength. We have to just basically draw it out. And drawing out, as I say, it won't be an easy task. Nothing is easy. But it would be important that we reach out and talk about all of these. We have discussions. We should have this kind of, information should be passing transparently as well. So know where to reach out, who to reach out to, how to get this task done. And that way we can leap from one level to another level. Hope that answers. Any other questions?
Find any responses from the women from your research, how they relate to the men? Was there any angle to that?
Actually, in
From your
my
research.
focus group where men and women were interacting from the same company, they were all managers in their all different departments, audit, tax, and all that. You can actually see that the kind of bonding and the teamwork that they were doing, they did not have any power struggle there. They were interested. They came into a project for a non-profit organization to get the task done, employing their skills together. And in fact, most of the one or two of the women were leading these projects, and they had like 10 over years of experience in skills volunteering, where they were in advisory positions in a non-profit organization. They were willing to share how to actually conduct these kind of tasks in the non-work domain, basically the non-volunteering domain. So they're able to share their skills and teach the men, in terms of how to solve this. They learned about teamwork. They learned about leadership from her as well. And they also learned about, bringing back all of these ideas back to work as well, back to their client services, because they provide client services, so they have to go back and deliver these skills back to their clients as well. So it's all those positive things that I drew out from my research in the focus groups as well. Even from non-profit organizations that when I've interviewed them as well, there's also an equal number of men and women, all similarly, having the same kind of skills that they were transferring to one another, sharing this information, and to get the job done. It's not so much of any power struggle in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will it be better when the next generation has less gender biases? I think next generation we will be talking more about the alpha, which are the Gen Zs. Gen Alpha, I wouldn't know which particular generation we're talking about here. But it's still a very difficult question to answer, because that generation is very tech savvy and lived in a world where they are tech based, and I think they have a lot to learn in terms of values, the way we have learned it. Not that they don't have, but their values are a bit different. The cultural development is also a bit different. It's very difficult to answer that question. And the next one I'll answer: when I was in school, I was told women can't think in 3D. Oops. How biased or true is that? So I'm not sure the person who posted is how young they were. Women can't think in 3D. There is certain things, I think I even experienced it certain ways where I can't spatially look at things, but my husband is pretty good in spatial way of representation. So like I said, it all depends on, maybe women engineers would be probably better in that. So maybe the STEM, careers in STEM programs, right, that can refute this idea. What steps can organizations take to prevent the motherhood penalty for women returning to work after parental leave? I think this one, a penalty, meaning that they are, I'm not sure exactly where this is going, but in terms of, are women discriminated because they are on maternity leave, and therefore they have become behind work or behind skills? I think it all depends upon the parental leave in Singapore anyway is sometimes it's about 8 weeks, if I'm not wrong, and it depends on different organizations. But we have seen women going on leave and coming back, and they're just jumping into their work scale. So I don't think that there is really a penalty for that, because this is given for work-life balance, and it's also given for men as they're part of their paternal leave as well. So it's both, right? If penalize women, then should penalize men also. So I don't think that's justified. Yeah.